Thank you so much and welcome to this panel discussion. As mentioned, my name is Rami Nokrati and I welcome you all to these hopefully fruitful discussions. So this is more or less simple conversations, and please, if you have, before I forget, if you have any question, please follow this procedure. Go to your Prella app, go to the bottom toolbar, click on the three dots, and then Q&A, and then ask your question. Once you ask the question, then I will see them here, and then I can ask our panelists. All right. Okay, so just briefly to tell you that this will be a very brief session, but our aim is that by the end of this session, we know what we should and what we should not do in order to smoothly transform to these digital strategies. All right, so the panel, the session structure is very simple. We will have 35 minutes discussion with our panelists, and then hopefully we will have like 10 minutes for question and answers. All right, so just a brief introduction about myself. As it was mentioned, I am the head of Artificial Intelligence Risk Laboratory of University College London Institute of Finance and Technology. I'm also a full-time faculty member of the same institute and program director of MSc in banking. By background, I'm a mathematician. Probably I'm the only one here. And like many other mathematicians, I also switched into finance and AI over the course of my career. All right, that's enough of me. I will pass on to Snehal to introduce herself, please.
Thanks, Ramin. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Snehal. I'm currently head of digital and client technology at Schroders Personal Wealth. Although we're a two-year-old company, we've obviously got the backing of two incredibly well-established establishments, Lloyds and Schroders, in terms of banking and asset management. My background actually is in digital marketing, so sat well within the business, and I'm very familiar with a whole scale of digital platforms and applications for digital marketing purposes, but more recently, over the last 2 years or so, transitioned over into digital technology, looking after the platforms and applications that our advisors and clients use. So that's me.
Nick, please.
Thank you. For those of you who were in the last session, I won't go into too much detail in terms of who I am, because I'll just be repeating myself. But ultimately, Nick Rosser, Head of Information Technology at Saunderson House. I've been working within the financial services sector now for getting on for 30 years, if I want to admit it, with various different roles there across front office through to obviously technology. Saunderson House itself, a wealth management firm with around about 5 billion under management. Today, recently been acquired by Rathbones as well, so looking forward to the opportunity to work with the team there in more detail as time progresses forward.
Right, thank you so much. So we will start the discussion. The first topic would be with Snehal. So Snehal, the digital transformation is obviously not very new. It has been started probably since 50, 60. But what's really new is like this acceleration. You know, you feel that the rate of change is kind of speeding up. I remember once it was, I think, CEO of Google. He said something interesting, that I got caught by surprise, even though I was at the heart of the problem. Okay. So having said that, it's really important for the leaders of the industry to know the key priorities in order to basically cope with this fast-pacing digital transformation. So in your opinion, what should be these key priorities for the leaders of the industry?
Yeah, sure. It's a really good point in that it's been incredibly fast-paced, and I think the last 12 to 18 months, at least 18 months, have shown us the importance of transforming, and a lot of applications and tools out there have been spun up ever so quickly, and I think some of the differentiators within the market and leaders within the market will find that I think starting off with a very modern technology stack is going to be key to driving that digital transformation. So what I mean by that is probably more around leveraging cloud technologies, using APIs, for example, to be able to integrate the various different platforms you use in-house, but also benefiting and leveraging some of the software as a solution providers, open banking services, etc. So understanding that there is a need for a very modern technology stack comes first and foremost, I think. It's easier said than done. So I think some of the longer standing establishments within the industry will find that you do have that fight against having to work with and deal with legacy systems. That's a constant challenge, but I also believe that there's nothing stopping you really from building a front-end, modern, user-friendly solution, whether that's an onboarding portal, whether that's a client platform, etc., and then plugging that into perhaps your legacy databases, which you can't really detach yourself from as easily. But I think looking strategically moving forward, how sustainable is that and how scalable is that? You need to be able to scale up and down as your business changes, as it evolves, as it grows, as your clients' needs change. Not only clients, but advisors need the efficiencies in place to be able to do their jobs as they need to. So I think first and foremost, it starts with the modern technology stack. In addition to that, I feel like, the idea about user centricity and keeping your user at the heart has been around for many years, and it's very well known across the business, across the industry, outside of industry. But to achieve that's quite difficult. And I think the ability to take some inspiration from outside of the industry will be really key and important to that. So if we have a look at people like Apple, for example, very different industry, I know, but you would have a team, an entire empire dedicated to the way a product feels, the way the packaging looks, how that makes you feel when you open that product, use that device, the sounds, the haptics, that experience that you get from using that product. If we could take a pinch of that and apply it to within industry, you're already in a much better place to service clients in the way that they expect. And on that note, both clients, advisors, everyone across the industry are now very much exposed to high performing technology services, tools and applications, and they've set a new precedence and expectation around what a digital experience or service looks like, and the expectation is right up there now. And I think for wealth tech, particularly fintechs, the wealth industry, banking, it's set a new benchmark. So it's being able to compete with that, really. And I would also say a third point would be around MI and analytics and data. So you can't have your user at the center of your model or your system, or have a user-centric approach without knowing their behaviors, what are they likely to do. So that's where we start talking about AI and machine learning and plugging that data into these services and tools and technologies to get some actionable insights from them, so we can actually serve clients in the way in which they want to be served. So all clients are looking for, your audience are looking for, your target audience are looking for is, essentially advice that they can trust, and in a way in which that they want to receive that.
Yeah, brilliant. So basically being adaptable, being agile is extremely important. Yeah. Nick, do you have any comments on that, especially on being adaptable and agile?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is at the fore, but I think what we must not lose sight of is what we've learned from the pandemic. I think as all businesses did, we had to adapt in greater or larger extent and expedite things that maybe under normal circumstances there would have been a slower process, dare I say it, around the delivery of those activities. We were able to prove to ourselves that we could deliver quality results in a more agile fashion. How can we apply that now to the processes that we are using from a day-to-day perspective without reverting unnecessarily and reintroducing, dare I say it, red tape associated with the processes that we're going to deliver solutions and digital transformation from in the future. So I think that's something we need to all look at our individual businesses. It will be different for different firms, but I think we definitely need to sense check against ourselves to make sure we're doing that.
Okay, brilliant. Now the next question is actually kind of continuation of what we discussed. Okay, so we need resources, we need infrastructure. Now there are two ways of getting these resources. One of them is basically built-in structure, rely on internal resources, and the other one is really just make partnership with the external resources and ecosystems. So these are two kind of mentality or two kind of approaches to solving these problems. So this question is actually for Nick, that what do you think should be the right approach for the leaders of the industry?
So I think there isn't, again, an ideal right approach. I think the balance between outsourcing, for want of putting it a better way, versus insourcing needs to be looked at on an individual case-by-case basis. I think there are several factors that will influence your decisions. First of all, in relation to your experience as an organisation, as a team, as a firm, whether that be around the technology, whether that be around the business enablement, and those types of factors definitely need to be fed into that. I think there are factors around agility that again may determine whether you've got the required skills, the required capacity, the required expertise to deliver something to market quickly, if that's where you want to go. Or ultimately, I think one of the other big questions that's important to ask yourself is, do you want to be first to market with something? Do you want to have an element of a solution which is unique, becomes a unique selling point for you at this point in time? If you do, then the opportunities to potentially insource that or work in a more discreet fashion with a third-party outsourcer supplier will be significantly influenced, I suspect. But there's nothing wrong with following others to market. And maybe customizing something around you and using an appropriate third party to deliver that and utilising a white label service if it's something which is a bit of a commodity to you. So I think overall for me it is around understanding what your business demands are, the specific case that you're trying to deliver, and challenge yourself as to whether it is appropriate for you to do it or not. Certainly within our firm we use a mixture of both, which is influenced by all of those factors and others in terms of making that decision.
Okay, brilliant. Snehal, do you agree?
I do actually. So my thoughts around that would be very much from experience as well. A hybrid model tends to work well. So as long as your core infrastructure and your data, your database, your core infrastructure is held in-house and within your control, there's nothing wrong with supplementing your digital ecosystem with the right digital partners. And I personally would, from our angle, stay clear of things like short-term suppliers or outsourcing, for example, but more building long-term digital partnerships. So if you're using more of a strategic vision on this, building the right partnerships with the right digital partners will probably be key to enriching what you're doing internally.
Okay, thank you so much. Now the next question is again for Nick, but it's open for both of you. So basically from a risk management perspective, there is this argument that if you try to rely on the external resources or making partnership, basically you will risk of, you will have some risk management issues and in case the external resources for whatever reason they collapse. So obviously there is a risk element, a very important risk element there. And then the question is that, okay, how that risk should be minimized, how that risk should be hedged. So Nick, please.
Yeah, I think for me here, it is around, again, understanding the importance of that relationship to you as a business. The level of scrutiny, pre-engagement, and the contractual and legal position that ultimately sits around that will be determined by the importance of that relationship to you as a firm. If you've got a platform of outsourced service, for sake of argument, that you want to use across your entire client base, it represents a significant business value element through to your clients or for your internal stakeholders, then the level of scrutiny that you're going to put around that, the level of contractual and legal obligations that sit around it, the contractuals, the day-to-day service management expertise that's required to assign against it, etc., is going to be much higher than if you've got an individual application, for sake of arguments, being used by an individual within a discrete area of the business that's not critical. So I think the first thing to do is to make sure you truly understand what the value of that contract is. And then once you've done that, and that is not necessarily in terms of contract value in terms of money, it can be in terms of criticality of service to the business. It is then around making sure you shape that contract and that overall relationship with the partner correctly. The legal should always be the last resort, in my opinion, but it is imperative that you've got that common understanding up front in terms of what you're looking to achieve jointly out of the service that you're engaging. Then it becomes an imperative to have a good, close working relationship with the relevant stakeholders across that third-party organisation to make sure that that becomes a true partnership as opposed to a vendor-client relationship. Because I think for me, partnerships are really what I try and achieve with my suppliers, and that leads to the best overall results because we're aiming for a common goal.
Okay. Thank you so much. Snehal, the idea of diversification is widely applied in risk management. Basically, you diversify the risk by adding more assets. I was wondering if we could have the same concept of managing this external risk using some sort of diversification, like having more partners in case if one fails, so the other can, take over. So what's your opinion on that?
I think, again, it's one of those things that's easier said than done. So, for example, a CRM, how would you manage that in that example? Your data sits in one place and probably accessible via different integrations and different systems. It also depends on what your internal models are as well. So if you have a very stringent policy in terms of onboarding suppliers, and it can be quite painful to onboard a new supplier, you want to work with someone, it's going to take 2 months to jump through hoops. Those processes are in place for all the reasons that Nick just described here. So I think diversification, yes, as long as you know that actually the partners that you're willing to have that partnership with that's a valued partnership. So you're not, exploring options for the sake of having almost backup solutions.
Brilliant, thank you so much. The next question is actually a very interesting one. So if we go back to, let's say traditional way of managing an organization, we had a gentleman or a lady there, and he or she kind of would transfer his or her experience to the next gentleman, and that's how basically it has been going on. But now we kind of see a problem because let's say the old generation could not or probably might not be able to cope with this rapid transformation of the technology. So we could probably in one organization, in one firm, we could have different people with different background. So basically the question is that how this inhomogeneity and people's skills in an organization could be managed. What are the practical solutions?
Is that a question?
Yeah, it's for you.
And is this more to do with like in-house, managing the expertise within in-house?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So basically we have different level of skills between the same team. Even this could be a very specific. So if you have a quant team, which is basically a very quantitative, bunch of people together, even within that we could have different specialities. So this is not just really about an organization that some of them can handle, let's say a PC, some of them they are like in their forefront of computer science development. So this issue can actually arise in any level of regardless of what is the level of the skills that this person has. So what we really like to address here is that how these different skills level could be basically put together so that the firm or the organization can operate more efficiently.
It's just about education and knowledge sharing, isn't it? It all comes down to, and this is one of the things that I was going to, really wanted to touch on, is that a lot of the time the responsibility of driving the technology agenda or digital transformation sits within either IT or with technology or with a certain team, or data sits within the MI team. And actually, you could almost have a data team sitting within the business and within marketing, for example, because essentially they want to understand the user journey and how best to serve their clients. So why not, share those resources across the business? Because ultimately, you'll be working in silos, but looking at the same client, wondering how to serve them. So the business are very close to clients and their issues and their problems and understanding their needs. And technology and IT are very much focused on driving, what technology stack should we be using, what kind of integration should we be considering, and actually merging that across, it's not difficult. So it's knowledge sharing really, and education, and actually remodeling internally what you can do to share the resources.
Okay, let me make it a bit more difficult. Let's say that you have some people, that for whatever reason, and this is not just about the old generation, it's actually happening in younger people as well. Of course, younger people are more engaging into the technology. But let's say that you have some people that they have this resistance of getting involved, either because they fear or lack of interest, and they are not passionate of basically to engage in this digital transformation and the technologies. So I know that's basically up to every manager how to handle that situation. I was wondering if you had experience of that sort yourself, and what are your advices?
There's two elements I'd say to that. Is one, if they're not passionate about driving the digital agenda, are they the right people to be supporting that initiative, right? And actually, what is their skill set and what are their ambitions? Because one way or the other, they are part of your employee base and they're there to do a job. So how else can we best use their skills and experience? Second to that, if there's a drive within the business to get everyone involved in the digital agenda, I've worked in places where you've had innovation initiatives, hackathons, get people involved in actually what digital means across the business. Also, in the future, they could be a client of a wealth firm, and what would their parents expect from a service? What would they expect from a service moving forward? So it's almost just bringing them on that journey and using quite innovative ways to make that happen.
Brilliant. Okay, let's see if Nick agrees with that.
I do. I definitely agree with a number of those points. I think for me though, I think it's not looking at it from a digital perspective. It's looking at it from arguably from a wider change point of view. Change adoption. You're always going to get those who are really keen in terms of driving that, and you're always going to get those who are really averse to it. And it is around making people understand from their own perspectives, and it requires effort, what's in it for them. And if people can understand what's in it for them, whether it's around a digital journey or a business transformational journey in some other way, they are more likely to become more engaged with it. But I think what I would say is that certainly from an age demographic perspective, I don't see this difference now between, which I certainly had a view of a few years ago, between the older generation and the younger generation. We've got a fairly young generation, group within our firm, because we take on graduates every year. And I would say my team have as many challenges, if not more, with some of those coming into the firm from a technology support perspective, as we do with some of the older people. And actually, up until relatively recently, one of the biggest technical geeks, if I can say that, within the firm was somebody who was in their mid-60s who worked within my firm. And he was, by all intents and purposes, a true uber geek with his own labs and everything else at home. So I think age is not a factor in terms of that. So I think it is around being dynamic, thinking in relation to your communications, your approaches, that you have to use in a multifaceted way to achieve the desired outcome that you want to achieve, and make sure people genuinely understand why they should be interested in it in the first place. And if you can identify those people who are change advocates and are real supporters, then they ultimately will do a fair amount of that work for you, in addition to what you're doing from a core fundamentals perspective.
Okay, thanks so much. We will move on to the next topic, and basically with this rapid pace of development in technology, in FinTech especially, where we are going, like in next, let's say 3, 5 or 10 years, what would be the main service of wealth managers? Would they just offer digital advices? What happens to the high street, basically less technical sort of management? Now,
yeah, so if we look at the spectrum of investors, right, you've got your ultra high net worth individuals, high net worth individuals, they are still going to expect, they'll have complex needs, complex portfolios. They're going to need that level. They're still going to need that level of custom, personal advice, and technology cannot really replace that. So I believe there will still be a need for a hybrid approach there in terms of being able to cater to those high net worth individuals, and then across the spectrum, kind of mass affluent market, there's huge potential to get them to self-serve a little bit more with the use of robo-advisors, the increase of that, we've all seen that within the market. And again, just going back to that hybrid approach, I think there'll always be a need for both human advisors and definitely a place to self-serve. So things like onboarding portals, enriching their experience with onboarding platforms, e-signatures, etc. How do we use the technology in the right place at the right time for the right reasons? So if it's to enable advisors to do their jobs really well and get them to focus on that and take the administrative, mundane tasks away by automating that, great. But if we're looking at replacing all advice, I don't see that happening in the next 3 to 5 years.
So in the next 5 or 10 years, we will not see a bunch of robots dealing with all sorts of issues that we have. What do you think, Nick?
Worried.
Interesting enough, I had a similar question in the last session as well when I was up here. I think I'd absolutely echo the comments that have just been made. I think it is unlikely that in all industry sectors we're going to end up in a position of robo-advice. I can remember when it was first sort of started to be bandied around, there was this mass concern that actually, advisors were no longer to be needed and robots were going to take over artificial intelligence, and we were moving into that generation. It hasn't happened. There's been a number of businesses that have been specifically created to achieve that, and they've had mixed success, I would say it's fair to say, in my view. Is there a marketplace for it? Absolutely. But is it going to replace that human touch for something which for a lot of people is an incredibly personal thing when you're talking about that wealth, that opportunity, that whether that's their pension wealth, whether that's their general ISA allowance, whether it's more complex investment structures, they build a relationship with a person and a brand in order to make sure that they are receiving appropriate advice on something which is incredibly personal to them. I don't think a robot can ever replace that.
It's that trust element, isn't it? It's about,
exactly.
You want, again, going back to the point, clients want advice that they can trust, but they're also going to want it, they've experienced digital platforms and services outside of industry. And so there will be that expectation for that to accelerate over the next 3 to 5 years. And I think the pandemic, the last 18 months have demonstrated the need with all these tools and services coming about over the last 18 months. I see them being enhanced, I see them being further developed and ultimately turning into fully fledged digital services.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. So basically, no matter how developed these technologies are, how advanced the decision-making AI is, we still need some human role involvement in the process. And actually, that I can confirm from someone who's coming from the quantitative finance that the issue of ethics and morality in the algorithms are extremely important. This was not actually part of the discussion, but it's interesting that it came up. Yeah, how would you convince a regulator that an algorithm is actually fair, right? That's a very challenging question, and it's currently at the forefront of research, and honestly, we don't have a clear answer to that.
And I think that's an interesting point, though, isn't it? Because we're identifying areas for evolution. The reality is that people will evolve that thinking and it will improve. There's no question about it. And it will be suitable for some people, for either through personal choice or through other reasons, to be using robo-advice, for want of putting it a better way, to achieve that desired outcome. But is that going to take over the entire market and the whole sector? In my view, absolutely not.
Okay, thanks. Then the next question, which was partially answered by Snehal, what impact the last 18 months had on personal development and in terms of the career and technology, and basically a mix of the two?
Yeah, I think the focus and prioritization has been around, from a client's perspective. I'm a client. I'm expecting a level of service, but I don't care that you as a business are using 3 to 5 different platforms to manage my data or manage my preferences. I just want a seamless user experience. So from that perspective, I think the priorities have been more around creating the right integrations, using the right technology partners. Schroders Personal Wealth is in a very unique, privileged position that we are 2 years old. So we have been able to build from the ground up. Yes, we still face some of the same challenges around legacy platforms, which I mentioned earlier, but we're in a position where we can actually start looking at a very user-centered approach to delivering some sort of a self-service, automated journey for our clients.
Okay, brilliant, Nick.
I think for me, it's as much around understanding. Just repeat. I'm sorry. The reason I'm stalling. Can you just repeat the question?
Sure. So basically, what impact the last 18 months, especially if you factor in the lockdown, the pandemic, and which has encouraged people to basically involve more in the technology. So what that period of time, what impacts that had on you, both personally or in terms of career development?
Thank you. So I think for me, it's around understanding that client engagement journey more, and actually thinking about that in a different way. Whether that's around the client engagement in terms of existing clients and the ability to service them. We are very much so a client-focused organisation built around personal relationships, trying to maintain and retain and enhance and grow new ones of those during a pandemic. Certainly in relation to growing new ones has been a challenge, as I'm sure it has been for a lot of organisations. Not being able to get out to events and everything and establish new relationships has proved more challenging than obviously under normal circumstances. And it's nice that we're obviously getting back to an event like we are today. So I think actually giving or forcing the business to think about how they can establish those relationships in a new way and retain those relationships in new ways has been a good thing. And I think certainly if we look at client retention, utilising technologies which probably 2 years ago, for us anyway as a firm, were not transformative and business critical, such as video conferencing, is now become an absolutely critical element to the service that we're providing. And I think we've all seen that in our personal and professional lives over the last 18 to 24 months. So I think actually it's thinking about that client journey more and how we can deliver that in a more flexible way than actually face-to-face contact.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, a very common problem, you are mute, so you have experienced that a lot. All right, I think it's time now to move on to some Q&A from our audience, and actually I have a couple of questions here. The first one is to Snehal. SPW has 300 hybrid face-to-face advisors doing a more traditional role. And I assume SPW is a reference to your company. Yeah. How is SPW adapting to digital sales or new direct channels?
I mean, at the moment, again, and the touch point there is the hybrid model, right? So, and the last 18 months have shown us exactly the necessity to service both face-to-face and digitally, and nothing's really changed moving forward. I think it will be embracing that and adapting more and more to embracing new emerging technologies, etc. But again, that hybrid model of how do we empower our advisors to do their job best, because no one's replacing them. Technology won't be replacing them, and it's just about enabling them to spend their time doing what they do best, really.
Okay, thank you so much. The next question, which is not reference to Nick, but I'm going to ask Nick. Actually, it's not reference to any, so any one of you. With the pandemic accelerating digital transformation strategies, which is basically something we also discussed, do you think some firm might have avoided implementing the best system that they will scale in favor of a solution that could be implemented quickly but will need to be replaced in a couple of years?
Absolutely. I'm certain that there will have been things that have been done in an agile fashion that would have led to non-optimal solutions being implemented. But I think it's actually important to, now that we've got a bit more time, to take stock in relation to that and have those brave decisions if we need to turn around and say, yeah, okay, we made that decision understandably as a business at that point in time. But do you know what? Actually now, looking at it with a fresh set of eyes and where the evolution of things have gone on with a bit more time and a little bit less pressure, there may be a better solution out there for us. But looking at that objectively and making sure if that is the case that we understand what the true business benefits are, that we're not looking for that extra finite small level of percentage gain, but there's actually a fundamental gain associated with the transition of a product, if that's what you're looking at. So that would be my view on that.
Okay. Snell, do you have anything to add, or I should move on to the next question? Is actually for you as well.
Okay, great. I actually agree with the point in that, again, going back to the point, a lot of tools, services and digital experiences have been spun up extremely quickly over the last 18 months. So if we have a look at digital adoption and transformation, that's accelerated by 3 to 4 years across industry in a matter of months. It's incredibly difficult to do something like that. And I think, what's been born from that are kind of mediocre, very quick fix solutions. But out of that, I think they will stick around. I think as long as there's more investment and funding in, investment in this area, you'll have the resources available to build on what you've established, develop them into fully fledged products.
Okay, thanks. The next question. In your experience of leading a new joint venture, which may still have some Lloyd's legacy systems, how did you prioritize which aspects of the client journey should be transformed first?
I think the agenda is pretty much driven by the business in that particular case, in terms of, you have TSA exits that you need to consider. And I think it just goes down to prioritization of, what's key, what do we need to kind of detach ourselves from, and what do we have a bit more time with? And again, is that leaning on our internal resources for that, or can we actually leverage services out there to help support that? So it's been about really prioritization, working extremely closely with the business. It's not a technology project, it's a business-wide project, and working as a team with stakeholders to understand what the priorities are.
Okay, thanks. Actually, this is very interesting. I think the whole pandemic has been a learning curve for everyone. I think we all, regardless of our position, we have learned something. And I know certainly some people, some organizations, they kind of exaggerated, on the event, and probably they invested on resources. They acted so quickly without the thought. They invested on resources, either technology or human resources, that probably they shouldn't have done that, or they should have put better thoughts on the way that they wanted to invest. So basically, this is actually for Nick, that what we can actually learn from this, so that next round, hopefully we will not have another global crisis, but what we can do in order to have a smoother transitions.
I think for me, it's the same as any change to a degree. But it was expedited, obviously, during the pandemic. Why would you not take stock now, as we were talking about earlier, to make sure that the decisions that you've made, that the projects that you've implemented, and the solutions that you've implemented are still fit for purpose for your business? And ultimately take account of what lessons you have learned throughout the pandemic. I know we're certainly doing that from both a technology and business continuity perspective. What can we learn from this now that we are hopefully on the other side of obviously the significant business disruption that we've all experienced over the last 24 months, and play those in to your future learnings. As a firm, as part and parcel of your processes, as part and parcel of change implementation, it's essential to always take lessons away from things. And I don't think the pandemic is any different from that. I think for me, and I go back to something I said earlier, it is around thinking around agility. And making sure that you can implement change in an agile fashion which leads to business outcomes when it is appropriate to do so. And we prove that we can achieve that as an industry more widely and as a worldwide economy during the pandemic. What can we do to make sure we continue on that journey, as opposed to maybe reintroducing some of those processes and red tape that we had beforehand? Is that still necessary?
Right, actually, the last question that I have here from the audience is kind of relevant. It's a very interesting question. How important is it for a firm to keep digital transformation strategies in place, even once they have implemented their digital platform? Will some rest on their laurels rather than innovate?
I don't think it can ever stop. I think as an organisation, as a firm, yes, you may have periods where you've got a significant transformational journey occurring, and you may have periods where it's slightly quieter. But digital has always moved. I mean, I've worked within the sector, as I mentioned earlier, for nearly 30 years, worryingly enough. And during that time, digital has become an increasingly important part of it. But it's gone through phases, and it will continue to go through phases, and it will continue to evolve. I don't think the digital journey ever stops, and I think we'll always have a strategy that underpins it, the same as you do a business strategy.
Okay, so now
I think adapting is going to be really crucial to this. So I think, once you have launched something and delivered something, time moves on. By then something else has, emerged in terms of technology. Client needs will evolve over time. If you're in your 60s or your 70s, you have different expectations now than, if you're 60 and 70, 10, 15 years time. So you've got to learn to adapt. I think whether you're a strong player in the market, whether you're the most intelligent, experienced, it's going to be, the leaders are going to be the ones that adapt and don't sit on the laurels, because, as we've seen with banking, for example, if we have a look at, traditional high street banking all the way through to challenger banks and digital-only banks, that journey has come a long way, and I see the same thing happening for wealth tech, wealth management.
So basically, you are saying that the days that you create something and then generate wealth for decades, that's gone. We have to constantly maintain that infrastructure and technology. All right, so we don't have any more questions from the audience, but we have some actually more topics to discuss here. So it has been argued a lot that one of the advantages of digital technology is basically to make it more accessible to common people. That was the idea of those that actually built Bitcoin, because the idea was that, okay, let's go around the banking system and trade ourselves, the common people. Although that has changed now because of how huge the Bitcoin blockchain has become. So basically, what do you think that in terms of democratizations, making finance more accessible to people, making technology more accessible, especially to developed countries? So one could argue that the developing country, they have taken the most advantage of these digital transformations. Like, for instance, there are countries that before this digital transformation, the majority of the people, or a big minority of the people, they didn't have a bank account. Now, thanks to this new reform and technology, now these people can have access to a bank account, which means that they can do business, all right? So basically, what do you think in terms of democratizations? And so do you think that in future this will be even better, or at some point, no, it will stop and it will go back to those higher class of the society that normally they take the most advantage of, development and technology?
Yeah, and I think it goes back to, your spectrum of clients. So again, you've got your high net worth individuals, ultra high net worth individuals. I think the traditional wealth management industry is very well modeled around servicing them. And then you've got, would I want to sit down for 3 hours with an advisor to talk about my financial well-being or my plans for my pension? Probably wouldn't want to do that. So I think there's absolutely an opportunity to service both in very different ways. And again, it's touching on the same points of this hybrid model of, making it accessible via, whether that's, making that onboarding easier, giving, educational advice. And I think it all stems from that, to at least get them onto the ladder, at least get them into that spectrum.
Okay, thank you so much. We have 2 minutes, so Nick, do you have anything to add to this?
Not a huge amount, in all fairness. I think for me it is around ease of adoption and use, and it's looking at the demographic of the individual global area. I wouldn't profess to be a global expert. I would profess to be more focused around the UK. But what I would say is that if you are able to make an application accessible, easy to understand as well as use, then it's going to make finance easier for people to use internationally, as well as I'm sure it would be in the UK.
So basically, now we are in an era. Is it safe to say that companies can target pretty much all people, not to be focused on a specific sector of the society?
I would say, again, it depends on your business model. I think that there is such a wide scope of different services and such a wide area and margin, I'm sure, within each of those areas, that you need to understand which area you're focusing in. And I think if you are able to do that, you will deliver a much better proposition for your ultimate client base, which is more suitable to their individual needs. There's no need to necessarily be tripping over each other in relation to trying to be all things to all men.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. We have 50 seconds left. So are there any final comments? I don't see. Actually, there's one quick question. I just arrived now. Has the pandemic led digital strategies in wealth tech to become as or more important than non-digital strategies? Now you have 30 seconds.
More important. I think they've always been quite important because, again, it's trying to keep up with the times and, you know, I think external factors are driving a lot of competition. Now, you combine competition with emerging technologies, you're driving innovation. So I think, yes, it's become more and more important. And, you know, again, with the pandemics, it's drawn out even more how important it is to be able to service in more than two ways.
All right, thank you so much. So this sums up this panel discussion. I hope that you all got something regardless of your background. And I think thank you so much for your attention. All right.